Well, what have we done so far? First 3 weeks of the course, we've read Plato, we've read Thomas Aquinas, we've read Descartes. They were trying to do their thing, man. You know, they were trying to do their thing, and it's pretty clear that Plato's thing in the Republic is to prove that we should be just, which requires him to define what justice is, but then to prove that we should be just rather than unjust. That was his thing. Thomas Aquinas' thing, I'm not. Thomas Aquinas' thing was explaining everything, I suppose, in the Summa Theologica. And Descartes' thing in the Meditations was trying to establish that he knew something, really asking a question, I suppose, in an honest way, whether he knows anything, and then trying to establish that he does actually know something. So these guys had their things, and but as we saw, especially in the case of Descartes and Plato, it's pretty clear that giving a theory of human nature or pronouncing on the nature of human beings is not their primary objective, but that that was something that they needed to do in order to achieve that objective to their own satisfaction. Plato gave us a theory of human nature that said that it's the rational part that's really the most important. And this is important for his argument that we should be just. Descartes found himself saying that we are essentially thinking creatures, that what's essential about us is the fact that we think. Now, it, of course, may be and probably is that we also have bodies, and that is certainly something that he wants to establish later on in the Meditations, but that we are essentially, because we are essentially thinking creatures, we cannot imagine ourselves not thinking. So thinking must be essential to us in a way that being embodied creatures is not. This is something he was led to conclude on the way to trying to sort out what he actually knew from what was false in his thinking. So we got, what did we get? I mean, from all three of them, definitions of what it means to be human. And that definition in some way or another was a claim about what was essential about being human. That is, there's all sorts of things in the world, let's imagine, and we can define them all by pointing out what is essential about them, what is the most important identifying characteristic. And so we've been doing with human beings, I suppose, what our thinkers are looking at have been doing with human beings. But what if that's all a game? I mean, a kind of a academic game that at the end of the day doesn't mean much. Well, let's take a look here. Karl Marx, The German Ideology, 1845. A little bit, different approach, right? Looking at this very famous passage right here, just as a way of getting started and characterizing maybe what's different about Marx's approach. He says men can be distinguished from animals by consciousness, by religion, or anything else you like. That is, this human beings being distinguished from animals. Like, what is it that sets us apart? What is man? What does it mean to be a human being as opposed to the rest of the natural world? Well, how do you distinguish the human being from the rest of the animal world? Well, it doesn't really matter. You can just say, well, they have consciousness, or they have religion, or they have culture, or they are reasonable, or they live in cities, like Aristotle said, they're political animals. You can, it'll be more or less true, I suppose, what he's saying, but it'll be kind of like silly, because the point is what he says next. They themselves begin to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they begin to produce their means of subsistence. That is, if two different sort of games, two different sort of processes here. To distinguish human beings from animals by virtue of some characteristic they have is to play a kind of a philosophical or academic game. But it's to fail to see that human beings have distinguished themselves from animals. That is, that human beings in the course of their history have actually actively, in a way, defined themselves or made themselves distinct, in a way, brought themselves out of nature when they began to produce their means of subsistence. Which means what? Well, the animal has a means of subsistence. The plant has a means of subsistence. The plant needs sunlight and water and some minerals. And if it's provided with those things, then it can live. The animal needs air and water and nutrition. And if the environment provides it with those things, it can live. But what it means to produce your own means of subsistence is to actively change the environment in such a way that it meets your needs. That is, an animal doesn't change its environment consciously to meet its needs and desires by instinct and by its natural capabilities. It takes advantage of what the environment provides for it. But a human being, a true human being, consciously changes its environment to suit its needs, which makes it unique. So this is a different approach, right? You could say that Plato, Thomas Aquinas, even Descartes, we're looking at human beings as these sort of static things, like there's a natural kind, a human being, and we can define it by looking at it because it is what it is and it's always the same. One of the things that Marx has indirectly introduced here is history, that human beings have changed themselves through their activities, that human nature is not something that has existed for all time, but human nature is something that is a result of human activity, which just opens up a whole new way of looking at things. It brings in history. It certainly brings in technology. And no doubt for Marx, it also brings in social relations, all of which are historically situated. So history, social life, activity, how we produce our means of subsistence, how do those ways change historically, and how does that change us? Those are the kind of questions that are opened up just by this little passage, this brilliant little passage. And it just opens up a new horizon, which will certainly be one that is taken up by Darwin, thinking in a different way, but also thinking of the human species historically.